Tensions are rising again in Europe over the flow of asylum seekers from northern Africa. Italy has summoned the Austrian ambassador to protest against plans to block migrants crossing the border into Austria. And Vienna is preparing to deploy hundreds of soldiers if the influx of migrants into Italy doesn't slow. The European Commission has laid out plans to help Italy cope with the rising numbers and has urged all European nations to play their part. Anne Barker reports.
The flow of migrants into Europe shows no sign of diminishing, and with it the number of deaths. Just this week, Spanish Coast Guard officials rescued 3 men from a half-sunken rubber dinghy that set sail from Morocco with at least 50 people on board. If their deaths are confirmed, the number of migrants dying this year while trying to reach Europe from North Africa would be around 2,200. Another 85,000 people who've survived the journey have arrived in Italy since January, a 20% rise on the same period last year. And Italy's Prime Minister, Paolo Gentiloni, has warned of the strain that's putting on his country.
The whole of Italy has mobilised to deal with the flows of migrants in the central Mediterranean, and it asks the EU for engagement, which is necessary if Europe wants to stay faithful to its own principles, own history, own civilisation. Italy needs support to avoid the flows becoming unsustainable, feeding hostile reactions in our society.
Mr Gentiloni has implored other European nations to take on some of the migrant burden. But now Austria is preparing to send troops to the Brenner Pass on the border with Italy if the flow of asylum seekers doesn't slow. Austria's Defence Minister Hans-Peter Doskozil says his government wants to avoid a repeat of the crisis in 2015.
If we start border controls, that does not mean that the Brenner Pass will be closed. We can see this on the border with Hungary, where there are border controls. We have to react to the situation, and when necessary, we may intensify border controls. What happened in 2015 must not be repeated.
In theory, Austria adheres to Europe's open border policy, though it now has border checks with Hungary and Slovenia. And with elections due in October, anti-immigration sentiment in Austria is running high. Italy has now summoned Austria's ambassador to protest at its moves, and a United Nations Special Envoy, Vincent Cochetel, says it's essential that all European nations do their bit.
It is unrealistic to think that Italy should have the responsibility to disembark everyone. This is not sustainable, this is not tenable. So we need to have other countries joining Italy on sharing that responsibility.
The European Commission has now laid out plans to help Italy cope with the rise in migrant numbers and pledged nearly $120 million to help stop asylum seekers taking the perilous journey across the Mediterranean. Most of the money will help Libyan authorities stop boats from leaving, and the rest will help Italy support those who arrive on its shores. The Commission's Vice President is Frans Timmermans.
It's about building up capacity together with the Italians. It's about attacking the root causes of this problem, doubling our efforts in talks with the countries of origin and transit. It's about increasing the capacity also of the Libyan Coast Guard. All these measures need to lead to an improvement of the situation.
In a separate move, Hungary, Poland, Slovakia and the Czech Republic have agreed to support Egypt in tackling its own refugee crisis. Millions of migrants now in Egypt are placing a huge strain on the country and its government. The 4 European nations have agreed on assistance to help Egypt stem the flow of asylum seekers.
Anne Barker reporting.